The house sat quiet at the end of a dusty trail, tucked between two broken hills and a dry creek bed. The wind always sounded like a whisper out there, sometimes a warning, sometimes a prayer. Inside the house lived a woman named Mary Ellen. She was small and worn thin, like something folded too many times. Her hands always shook, not from sickness, but from the kind of fear that doesn't go away when the danger leaves the room. Her eyes stayed low. Her voice was barely there. But her heart, though bruised and buried, was still beating. Mary Ellen didn't used to be that way. Before the baby, before the drinking, before Tom died, she had laughter once. And she used to sing little church songs, mostly when she cooked. But that had all gone quiet. What replaced it was a silence that felt heavy. And in that silence, every night, came the sound of footsteps down the hallway. Every night, she closed her eyes and prayed they would turn away. And every night they didn't. The boy's name was Samuel, 19, built strong from hauling wood and working fence posts since he was a kid. But something was off about him, something twisted. He wasn't right, not in the head, not in the heart. And Mary Ellen knew it. She had known since the first time he came home with blood on his knuckles and didn't bother to explain. Since he started locking his door and keeping a rifle beside his bed. Since he started saying things like, "You ain't going nowhere, Ma." Folks in town didn't ask questions. Out in the territories, you didn't poke your nose where it didn't belong. And Mary Ellen had never once told a soul what went on behind that door. Not even the preacher. Not even when her wrist was swollen or her lip split. She'd just say she slipped or that a horse kicked up mud too hard. She was good at lying by then. The only one who ever looked her in the eye and saw something real was the man who brought her dry goods once a week. His name was Caleb, a rancher from the North Ridge. Lost his wife 6 winters ago and wore grief like a second skin. But he had kind eyes, and he didn't believe in pretending not to see what was plain. Every time he dropped off flour or salt or sugar, he lingered just a little. Not to flirt, not even to talk much, just to make sure she was still standing, that her face wasn't too bruised, that her hands didn't shake too bad when she reached for the bag. Mary Ellen never asked for help. She didn't think help was something meant for women like her, women who failed to raise a son right, who let things get so bad they couldn't sleep at night. But Caleb, he saw something else. He saw a woman still trying to protect the last shred of love she had left, even if it was killing her to do it. There was something wrong in Samuel's eyes. He looked at his mother like she was just another piece of the house, like a table or a rug, like something he owned, something he could break. And he did, in ways too quiet for the law to notice, in ways too cruel for most people to imagine. He didn't scream or throw punches in daylight. He waited for the dark, waited for the wind to rise, and then he came for her. No one had ever taught Samuel how to grieve. When his daddy died, he was 14. He cried once, then went silent. Took to smoking behind the barn and carving names into the wall with a pocket knife. Mary Ellen tried to talk to him then, but he would just stare at her like she'd stolen something from him. Over time, that stare turned to blame, and the blame turned to rage. But it wasn't loud rage. It was quiet, cold, the kind that burned slow. The nights were the worst. When the lamps were out and the cold crept in through the cracks in the walls, Mary Ellen would hear the boards creak. She'd hold her breath, count to 10. Sometimes he wouldn't come. Most times he did. He'd stand in her doorway for a while, not saying a word, just watching. And then he'd move toward her with eyes full of something dark, something that didn't belong in any sun. She had a bruise on her collarbone that never quite healed, a rib that cracked one winter and never set right. She learned to move quiet, to keep her eyes on the floor, to fold his clothes just the way he liked, and keep the food hot, even when he stumbled and drunk near midnight. But on that particular Tuesday, the day the wind came hard from the south and the sky turned that strange copper color, Caleb saw her different. She opened the door slower than usual. Her lip was swollen again, her eye puffy, but that wasn't what stopped him. It was the way her shoulders slumped, like she'd finally given up trying to hold the weight. He didn't say a word right away, just stood there, holding the sack of beans and flour, watching her. Then he said, "All right, Mary?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Just a small shake of the head, like a whisper trapped in her throat. And that's when Caleb knew whatever was happening in that house had gone too far. Out here, there weren't sheriffs you could count on. Most didn't ride this far unless there was land to claim or someone important made the call. But Caleb didn't need a badge to do what was right. He just needed to see her one more time like that. That night, Mary Ellen sat on the edge of her bed, hands folded tight, eyes on the door. The wind was howling outside, and she heard the steps again, heavy, slow. Her breath caught. The knob turned. But before Samuel could cross the threshold, there was a knock at the front door. Loud, sudden. Samuel turned his head, annoyed, muttered something under his breath, and went to answer. Mary Ellen didn't move, just listened. A moment passed, then another, and then came the voice she hadn't expected to hear. "Evening, Samuel," Caleb said, low and steady. "Mind if I come in?" Samuel laughed a short, bitter sound. "Bit late for visits, ain't it?" Caleb didn't answer right away. Then he said, "I saw your ma today. She looked hurt." "She fell," Samuel said quickly. "Ain't none of your concern." But Caleb stepped inside, calm, like he'd done it 100 times. "I think it is." Mary Ellen stood up then, her legs shaking. She crept toward the hallway, hands clenched. She could hear the tension rising in the air like a storm. "I ain't gonna ask again," Caleb said, his voice hard now. "You leave her alone." Samuel's laugh faded. "This ain't your house." "No," Caleb said. "It's hers. And you forgot that a long time ago." Mary Ellen reached the end of the hallway and stood behind Samuel. Her son's fists were clenched, his body tight like a spring. But for the first time in a long while, he looked unsure. Caleb wasn't scared of him, and that did something to Samuel's pride. "You need to go," Samuel muttered. "Right now." But Caleb just looked past him at Mary Ellen. "You all right?" She didn't nod, didn't speak, just stood there, eyes wide, heart thudding like a drum. Samuel turned fast, like he was going to grab her. And that's when Caleb stepped forward, placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder, and said in a voice that left no room for question, "That's enough." The room went still. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Something broke in that moment. Not loud, but deep. Inside Samuel. Caleb didn't leave that night. He stood in Mary Ellen's kitchen long after Samuel stomped out of the room and slammed his door. The oil lamp on the table flickered, casting thin shadows across the walls. Mary Ellen sat stiff in the corner chair, hands in her lap, afraid to speak. It wasn't just the fear of her son. It was the fear that came when someone kind finally saw the truth. She'd spent so long hiding, she didn't know how to stand upright in the open. Caleb leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "You got somewhere safe to go." She shook her head. He nodded slowly. "Then I guess I'll stay a while." She opened her mouth to protest, but he held up a hand. "I'm not asking. You don't owe me anything. But you're not sitting alone in this house tonight." She looked down. "He'll come back madder. I'll deal with him." The next morning, Caleb sent word to a woman named Hattie Bell, who ran a small boarding house on the far edge of town. Hattie was 60, sharp-eyed, and full of the kind of love that was more bark than kiss. She'd known Mary Ellen back when they were both young and still believed in happy endings. Hattie hadn't stepped foot on that ranch in years, but the second she heard Caleb's message, she dropped her broom and rode out. Mary Ellen barely recognized her. Hattie had grown heavier and tougher over the years, her gray hair twisted into a thick bun, her cheeks always red from barking orders at boarders. But her eyes were the same, hard when they needed to be, soft when they didn't. She walked straight into the kitchen, wrapped Mary Ellen in a rough hug, and said, "About damn time." That afternoon, as the three of them sat at the kitchen table with mugs of bitter coffee, Hattie laid out what she thought should happen. Mary Ellen should pack her things, come stay in town, and leave the boy to rot alone. But Mary Ellen wouldn't hear it. "He's my son," she said quietly. Hattie slammed her mug down. "He's a monster. Caleb didn't say anything, just watched Mary Ellen's face. He could see the storm there, the war between love and fear. She hadn't let go of Samuel yet, not completely. Mothers like her never did. But it wasn't just Hattie who came into the picture. That week, word started to drift through town. Not loud, not fast. Just soft whispers passed between neighbors. Caleb stayed over at the Hollowell place. Samuel's been seen pacing near the feed store looking like he's ready to snap. Mary Ellen's face was black and blue again. The town's doctor, Abram Hale, heard it too. A tall, lean man with a limp from an old injury. Dr. Hale didn't like getting involved in domestic matters. But something about the talk made him uneasy. He treated Mary Ellen years ago when she miscarried, long before the bruises started showing up. He remembered the way she wouldn't meet his eyes, how she flinched at loud sounds. And now, hearing that Caleb had stepped in, Hale figured it was time to do more than listen. He rode out one morning under the pretense of checking a neighbor's frostbite and dropped by the Hollowell place unannounced. Mary Ellen was startled to see him. Her instinct was to lie, say everything was fine, but Hale didn't push. He just sat on the porch with her and talked about the weather, about Caleb, about the boarding house in town. Before he left, he handed her a small bottle of balm and said quietly, "If you need help, real help, I'll be here." Samuel, meanwhile, was slipping further into the dark. He'd never liked Caleb, and now that Caleb had stepped in, his rage was growing. He started drinking more, spending long hours in the barn carving into beams with a hunting knife, talking to himself when he thought no one was around. The townsfolk started to notice his temper flaring in public, shouting at the butcher, throwing a coin at the general store clerk when they gave him the wrong change. And then there was the incident at the saloon. A young man named Clint Weaver, fresh from Abilene, made the mistake of asking Samuel about his mall one night over cards. It was meant as a joke, something careless. But Samuel flipped the table, broke Clint's nose, and had to be dragged out by two ranch hands. That night, Samuel walked home alone in the dark, mumbling things no one could understand. But one thing was clear: he blamed Caleb, and he wasn't going to let it go. Meanwhile, Caleb's connection with Mary Ellen deepened. He didn't push her to leave. He didn't try to fix her. He just kept showing up, fixing the fence, bringing in water from the well, talking soft when she looked like she might break. He told her about his wife, how she died of fever one spring and how the house never felt right after. How he used to sleep on the porch just to feel the wind because the walls were too quiet. Mary Ellen listened. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she didn't. But not everyone in town supported Caleb's meddling. The pastor, Reverend Harlan, a soft-spoken man with strong beliefs about family privacy, pulled Caleb aside after church one Sunday. "You sure you're doing right by getting involved?" he asked. Caleb didn't answer. "Boys like Samuel," the Reverend continued, "they burn out on their own. You stir the pot too much, you might make things worse." Caleb just looked him square in the eye. "They'll get worse. But I'm not letting him touch her again." Even among Caleb's own ranch hands, there were whispers. One of them, Amos Tiller, had grown up with Samuel. They used to fish together and steal apples behind the church. Amos didn't believe Samuel was all bad. He just lost his way, he told Caleb one night. Boy needs discipline, not strangers in his house. Caleb didn't argue. He just said he's not a boy anymore. What no one knew, not Caleb, not Hattie, not Dr. Hale, was that Mary Ellen was hiding something else. Something she hadn't told a soul. Something from years ago, buried deep. A letter, folded and hidden in the back of her sewing box. Yellowed with time. It was from Tom, her late husband, written shortly before he died. In it, he spoke of fear. He said Samuel had changed, that he'd caught him with dead animals, strange drawings, rage in his eyes that couldn't be explained. Tom had been scared, and he wrote, "If anything happens to me, Mary, it wasn't no accident." She never showed the letter to anyone. She couldn't bear to believe it. But sometimes late at night, she pulled it out and read it again. And each time, her stomach twisted with guilt. because part of her had always known. And then there was the money. Samuel had been taking money from the house, hidden coins she kept under the floorboard. It wasn't just for drink. He was buying things. Rope, a hunting knife, oil. She'd seen the receipts. She didn't ask. She didn't dare. But something in her gut told her he was planning something. Something bigger. Something final. Caleb sensed it too. Not with words, but with the way Samuel watched him from the ridge some nights. The way he lingered near the barn when Caleb was working the fence. The quiet threats hidden in his silence. A storm was coming. You could feel in the air, thick and charged. The people who loved Mary Ellen were circling close now, tighter than before. But the danger wasn't out there. It was inside the house. In the sun, she still couldn't stop loving. And in the secrets, she couldn't bring herself to tell. The days grew heavier, slower, like the air itself had turned to molasses. Everyone felt it, but no one said a word. Caleb came by the ranch every morning now. He never asked Mary Ellen for permission anymore. He just showed up, hat in hand, toolbox in a wagon, fixing things, watching Samuel, keeping close. Samuel started leaving before dawn and returning long after dark, his boots caked in mud, his face pale and tight, like he hadn't been sleeping. One morning, Caleb found the chicken coop door hanging open and feathers scattered across the dirt. Every bird gone, just blood and claw marks left behind. He didn't say anything to Mary Ellen, but he looked at the ground a long time, following the drag marks with his eyes. They led into the trees. Not toward town, not toward the barn, into the pines behind the house. That afternoon, he followed them. Quiet, careful. The wind was still. The only sound was his own breath and the crunch of dead twigs underfoot. About a mile in, he found it. A clearing, a makeshift circle of stones, feathers piled up in the center, and hanging from a branch overhead, a burlap sack soaked through and dripping something red onto the dirt below. He didn't touch it, just stared at it. Something wasn't right. Something had gone beyond anger, beyond cruelty. This wasn't just a boy with fists. This was something darker. Caleb turned back and didn't say a word to Mary Ellen. But when he rode into town that night, he told Dr. Hale everything. Hale listened without blinking. "He's losing his grip," he said finally. "Or already lost it. We need the sheriff. There's no sheriff out here. Closest lawman's 2 counties over. And even if he came, he'd call it family business and leave again by morning." Caleb nodded. He already knew that. Back at the ranch, Mary Ellen found a floorboard in her room, pulled up. The coins she had hidden there, gone. And more than that, the letter from Tom. The one she'd kept buried for years. That was gone too. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed, heart thudding so loud it filled the room. She didn't cry. She just stared at the empty space in the floor, knowing Samuel had read it. Knowing he knew that even his father had feared him. That night, he came home drunk again, but different. Not stumbling, not yelling. Calm, cold. He sat at the table across from her and smiled. "You used to sing," he said. She didn't respond. "You should start again. It's too quiet in here." She kept her eyes on her hands. "Don't you want to talk about what you wrote in that letter?" he asked. Her heart sank. "That wasn't my letter." He leaned forward, the smile gone now. "You kept it. That's the same." She stood slowly, pushing back her chair. "You need to sleep, Samuel." But he didn't move. Just watched her with that same strange calm. "You think Caleb's gonna save you?" She walked to the sink, back turned. Her voice trembled. "He's a good man." Samuel laughed, low and bitter. "He's gonna die out here, just like Pa." The words landed heavy in the air, and Mary Ellen turned slowly to face him. "Your father didn't die in no accident, did he?" Samuel didn't answer. Just stood, picked up his coat, and walked out the front door into the dark. By the next morning, Caleb had made his choice. He came early, with his wagon loaded and his jaw set. He told Mary Ellen to pack her things. "You don't owe that boy your life," he said. "He's not a child anymore. And he's not just broken, he's dangerous." She hesitated, then nodded. But the decision came too late. Caleb hitched the horses and walked around to the barn. The door creaked open easy, but the second he stepped inside, something slammed into the back of his head. Darkness swallowed him before he even hit the ground. Hours passed. Mary Ellen waited by the window, watching the trees. When Caleb didn't come back, she stepped outside. His wagon sat still by the fence, one horse pawing at the dirt, the other restless. She walked to the barn slowly, dread rising with each step. The inside was too quiet, tools scattered, the smell of oil and something bitter in the air. And then she saw it, blood, a streak of it on the floor, leading toward the loft ladder. She gripped the rail and climbed with shaking hands. At the top, she found Caleb, bound at the wrists, bruised and unconscious, slumped against a haystack. "Caleb," she whispered, rushing to him. "Can you hear me?" He stirred, moaned softly, then opened one swollen eye. "He's gone." He took the rifle. Panic rose in her chest like fire. She helped him down the ladder, and they stumbled back to the house together. Inside, she found her worst fear waiting. On the kitchen table sat the rifle. The chamber emptied. Beside it, her old wedding photo, torn in half, her face missing, and scratched into the wood with a blade. "He was right about me." Hattie arrived at dusk, breathless from riding hard. "I heard from Amos. Samuel was seen near the river, carrying something in a sack." "He's not running," Caleb said from the chair, holding an ice pack to his head. "He's planning something." Mary Ellen sat on the floor near the hearth, arms wrapped around herself. "He thinks I chose Caleb over him." "You did," Hattie said, "and it's the first right thing you've done in years. But he's still my son." Hattie knelt beside her. "Then pray for his soul, but protect your own." The mystery deepened that night. Caleb remembered something just before he passed out. Samuel had said, "They all think I'm broken, but she made me this way." Mary Ellen flinched when Caleb repeated it. "I need to tell you something," she said finally, voice low. And then she told them what she'd never said out loud, not even to Tom. When Samuel was 10, she caught him holding the neighbor's dog underwater in the trough. Laughing, she'd screamed, pulled him off, locked him in the shed until Tom got home. She wanted to send him away to a doctor or a place that could help. Tom refused. "No son of mine's going to be locked up like some animal," he said. But it didn't stop. Animals, then lies, then the fire in the old shed behind the property. "It was always small things," she whispered, "but they kept piling up." Caleb looked at her, stunned. "You knew." "I thought I could fix it," she said. "I thought if I loved him enough, he'd change." "No one could have fixed that," Hattie muttered. Outside, the wind picked up, a dry, hot wind, the kind that didn't bring rain, only warnings. Then came the sound, something hitting the porch. They all froze. Caleb stood, slowly stepped to the door. A small wooden box sat on the step. No note, just an old scarf tied around the lid. He opened it carefully. Inside, a dead sparrow, its eyes scratched out, and a matchbook from the old church down the valley, abandoned for years. Caleb's hands clenched. "He's calling us there. He's playing a game," Hattie said. Mary Ellen stared at the box, her voice barely a whisper. "He wants to burn something." Caleb turned to her. Or someone. The midpoint had arrived. This wasn't about escape anymore. This was about stopping a boy who'd turned into something far more dangerous than any of them had been willing to admit. Samuel didn't just want to punish his mother. He wanted to make her watch everything she loved turn to ash, starting with Caleb. And he wasn't hiding anymore. He was waiting. The old church hadn't seen a sermon in nearly a decade. It was gray, dried out by summers that showed no mercy. The roof sagged, the bell tower tilted, and every window wore a coat of dust thick enough to hide anything moving inside. When Caleb, Mary Ellen, and Hattie reached it, the sky was already bleeding orange into the plains. A storm hadn't come, but the wind felt like it was chasing one. Caleb stopped the wagon near the edge of the clearing and climbed down slowly. His ribs still ached from Samuel's ambush in the barn, but he gritted through the pain, rifle in hand. He turned to Mary Ellen. "You stay here." She shook her head. "I'm going in." "No." he said sharply. You can't reason with him anymore. She met his eyes. I'm not going to reason. I'm going to end this. They left Hattie behind with the reins, eyes scanning the tree line. She was holding a pistol now, even though her hands trembled. You've got 10 minutes, she told him. If you're not back, I'm coming in after you with every bullet in this thing. Inside the church, the air was thick with dust and old rot. The pews were still lined up, though most were broken or tilted. The altar had collapsed on one side. Bits of ash and burned paper littered the floor. A trail of fresh boot prints marked a path straight down the aisle. Then came the smell, kerosene. Caleb raised his rifle and scanned the room. He's here. Mary Ellen stepped ahead of him, past the pews, toward the pulpit. That's when Samuel's voice rang out, echoing through the rafters. I thought you'd come sooner, he said. Guess you needed someone else to push you. He stepped out from the shadows behind the altar, calm and quiet, dressed in black from neck to heel. There was something different in his eyes, no flicker of doubt, no human left in the stare. Just calculation. Put the matches down. Samuel, Caleb said, rifle steady. Samuel smirked. You think this is about burning down a church? His hand moved slowly, lifting something from his coat pocket. A picture, torn, weathered. Mary Ellen's face as a young woman. She lied to me, Samuel said. Kept secrets. Let me believe I was normal. Let me grow up thinking love meant silence. Mary Ellen stepped forward. You were sick, Samuel. I didn't know how to help. No, he said, voice hard. You chose not to help. Caleb moved beside her. This ends now. Samuel's hand twitched, and then came the spark, a small flame at his fingertips. The match flared up, lighting his face in a sudden orange glow. Caleb fired. The shot tore into the wood beside Samuel's leg. He jumped back, dropping the match, but not before it touched the edge of the cloth he'd soaked in oil. Flames licked up the altar and caught on the Oldham books. Panic surged. Caleb ran forward, tackling Samuel before he could light another match. The two men hit the floor hard, rolling in ash and dirt, fists flying. Mary Ellen screamed, rushing to stomp out the flames, but the fire was already spreading, slow at first, then faster, feeding on old wood and forgotten cloth. The two men fought like animals, rage against control, past against future. Caleb pinned Samuel down, fist raised, breathing hard. You think pain makes you strong? He shouted. You're just scared. Samuel spat blood. You're not my father. No, Caleb said, and thank God for that. Mary Ellen grabbed a bucket of sand from beside the door and flung it at the base of the flames, coughing as smoke rose around them. The fire hissed, but didn't die. Caleb turned to her. We need to get out. She looked at Samuel, who lay coughing on the floor, one hand clutching his side. Not without him. He's tried to kill you. She stepped toward her son, and he's still mine. But when she reached him, he flinched away. Not with fear, but disgust. Don't touch me, he rasped. You had your chance. You chose him. Mary Ellen knelt beside him anyway, tears streaking through the soot on her face. I chose me, Samuel, for the first time in 20 years. He looked at her, eyes wide, disbelieving. Then why are you still here? Because I needed to say goodbye. Behind them, the fire cracked louder. Smoke was climbing up the walls, curling through the rafters. The ceiling groaned. Caleb grabbed Mary Ellen's arm. We have to go. Now. She stood, looked down at her son one last time, then turned and followed Caleb through the smoke, out into the cold wind. Hattie was waiting by the wagon, eyes wide as they stumbled toward her. Where is he? Mary Ellen didn't answer. Just climbed up into the wagon, face blank, eyes shining. A moment later, Samuel stumbled out of the church, one hand on the doorframe, coughing hard. He didn't look at them, just staggered past the wagon and into the woods without a word. He didn't run. He didn't cry. He disappeared, like smoke fading into trees. Back at the ranch, silence settled. No one spoke for hours. The church burned through the night, a bright flame on the hill. Someone in town must have seen it, but no one came to put it out. The next day, Caleb sat on the porch sharpening his knife, hands slow and tired. Hattie packed up her things and kissed Mary Ellen on the cheek. "You can't fix what's broken," she said gently, "but you can stop it from breaking you." Mary Ellen nodded. She hadn't slept. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. But for the first time, she wasn't hiding them. The townsfolk started whispering again. They always did. Some said Samuel left the territory, went east, changed his name. Others claimed he was seen in a town up north, working odd jobs, staring off at nothing for hours. Mary Ellen didn't care. She started spending her mornings in the garden again, pulling weeds, planting potatoes. Simple things. She began to hum under her breath sometimes. Not songs of joy, just little tunes to fill the silence. Caleb stayed close, but never too close. He fixed the barn roof, cleaned the gutters, kept his rifle oiled and nearby. They didn't talk about love. They didn't talk about the future. They just sat on the porch in the evenings and watched the wind roll across the hills. But the consequences didn't vanish. Some nights, Mary Ellen woke up gasping, dreaming of footsteps in the hallway. Other times, she stood in the kitchen for minutes at a time, lost in thought, staring at a drawer she used to keep locked. One evening, weeks later, a letter arrived. No return address, no message inside, just the torn photograph she thought had burned, the other half. Her face, once cut out, now returned. Caleb burned it in the stove without a word. And that was the cost. Every choice, every silence, every love too blind to speak. They all left marks that wouldn't fade. But they had survived. Together, scarred but standing, they faced the wind. The first snowfall came early that year. Just a thin sheet of white, barely covering the dry ground, but enough to quiet everything. Even the birds seemed to stop their songs. The air outside Mary Ellen's ranch hung cold and still, like it was holding its breath. Inside, the fire crackled soft, casting light over the same walls that had once felt like prison bars. Caleb stood near the hearth, reading over a note someone had slipped under the door that morning. No name, just a short line scrawled in smudged pencil. "He's been seen again, south of Powder Creek." Caleb didn't say anything right away. He just handed the note to Mary Ellen and watched her read it. She folded the paper slowly, laid it on the table, and stared at the wall for a long time. "He's not done." "No," Caleb said quietly. "He's not." They didn't know what he was doing there, but Powder Creek was just 5 miles south, close enough to make the air feel tight again. It was a place no one went unless they had a reason. An old lumber site, abandoned after a fire gutted most of the trees. There were caves in those hills, empty cabins, places to hide. Mary Ellen didn't sleep that night. She sat at the edge of her bed, the old quilt wrapped around her shoulders, her mind dragging her backward through the years. Images flickered through her memory. Samuel's first laugh, his first lie, the first time she caught him watching her with eyes that didn't look like a boy's. Then came Tom's letter again, words etched like scars. "If anything happens to me, Mary," it wasn't no accident. She hadn't told Caleb everything. Not yet. At sunrise, she finally did. Caleb was out chopping firewood when she walked out in her shawl and boots, her breath turning white in the morning air. "There's something I need to say." He stopped, laid the axe down slowly. "I knew what he did to Tom," she said. "I didn't see it with my eyes, but I knew." Caleb didn't speak. "I found Tom face down behind the barn, just like they said, head split on a rock. But there was blood under Samuel's nails. I washed it off before anyone could see." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because he was my son. And I thought, if I told the truth, he'd be taken. I thought he'd hang." "He should have," Caleb said flatly. Mary Ellen nodded. "I know that now." They stared at each other in silence. The cold pressed in around them. "He'll come back here," Caleb said. "I can feel it. I want him to." Caleb frowned. "You want him to come back?" "I want him to hear the truth," she said. "And then I want him gone. For good." That afternoon, they prepared. Caleb loaded his rifle, cleaned the pistols, and walked the fence line, checking for breaks. Mary Ellen baked cornbread like it was any other day, but her hands were slow. careful, every motion heavy with meaning. By nightfall, the clouds rolled in thick and dark, and just after supper, there was a knock at the door. Not hard, not loud, just 3 soft taps. Mary Ellen froze. Caleb stood up slowly and walked to the door. He didn't open it. "Samuel?" he asked through the wood. A pause, then a voice, hoarse and cold. She said she wanted to talk. Caleb looked at Mary Ellen. She nodded once. He opened the door. Samuel stepped inside like he'd never left, boots muddy, face pale, clothes hanging loose on his frame. He looked thinner, not weaker, just stripped down, like something inside him had burned away. His eyes found Mary Ellen first. "You really want to talk?" She stood. "Yes." Caleb didn't move far from her, just stood near the table, gun within reach. Samuel glanced at him. "Alone?" "No," Mary Ellen said firmly. "You say what you came to say with him standing right there." Samuel smirked. "So this is how it is now? You picked a stranger over your own blood?" "No," she said. "I picked truth over lies. I picked peace over fear. I picked myself." He looked away, jaw tight. "You should have picked me sooner." Mary Ellen took a step closer. "I know what you did to your father." Silence. Samuel's face didn't move. "He slipped." "You killed him," she said, voice steady. "And I covered up. I told the neighbors he'd hit his head. I burned the shirt you wore that day. I lied to save you." His nostrils flared. "Then we're even?" "No," she said, taking another step. "We're not." Samuel looked between her and Caleb. His voice turned low. "You think you found something real with him? He'll never look at you the same. Not after this." Caleb finally spoke. "I've seen the worst in her. I'm still here." Samuel laughed. "Then you're a bigger fool than I thought." Caleb's voice stayed calm. "You came here to break something, to tear her down. But the truth is, she already did the hardest thing. She let you go." Samuel stared at his mother, something flickering behind his eyes. "You don't love me." She didn't blink. "I do, but I don't trust you." And that's where it ends. The words cut through him sharper than any bullet. He stepped forward. Caleb raised the rifle. "Don't." Samuel stopped, looked at the gun, looked at Caleb, then laughed again, but it was hollow. "I could end this right now," he muttered. Mary Ellen whispered, "So could we." A long moment passed. Then Samuel did something no one expected. He dropped his bag on the floor, pulled out the knife inside, and placed it gently on the table. "I came to kill one of you," he said. Neither Caleb nor Mary Ellen moved. Samuel stepped back toward the door. "But maybe I'm already dead," he said softly. And with that, he walked out into the snow. Caleb started to follow, but Mary Ellen stopped him. "No, he might come back," Caleb warned. "I don't think he will." They never saw Samuel again. Some said he made it to the border, found work in another territory. Others believed he froze in the woods that night. No body was ever found. No more letters came. It was as if the earth swallowed him up and moved on. Weeks passed. The snow thickened, blanketing the land in white. The scars of the past didn't vanish, but they softened. Caleb moved in for good. Not as a protector, not as a savior, but as a man who'd been through hell with her and chose to stay anyway. One night, while sitting by the fire, Mary Ellen looked at him and said, "I used to dream about running. For years, I'd lie in bed and imagine packing up and never coming back." Caleb nodded. "Why didn't you?" "Because I thought survival meant staying. And now I know survival means letting go." Outside, the snow fell gently against the windows. Inside, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was peace. Hard won, but peace all the same. The spring melt came slow that year. Snow clung to the shaded parts of the land long after the sun had started warming the hills. Mud replaced ice, and the creek by the east pasture rose and spilled past its usual banks, flooding the low grass. But there was a gentleness in the thaw, something that didn't rush, didn't force, just changed quietly and steadily. Mary Ellen watched the water flow from her porch, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. The same land that once held so much fear now breathed softer. There was still weight in her chest sometimes, still shadows that passed over her heart when she thought too long about the past. But the house no longer felt haunted. Caleb was in the barn that morning, working on the new fencing. He whistled while he worked, something low and tuneless but steady. That sound alone, his presence, his peace, was enough to keep Mary Ellen grounded some days. Not because he fixed her, not because he saved her, but because he saw her even with all the cracks. After Samuel left, Mary Ellen hadn't spoken his name for weeks. It was too raw, too tangled with guilt and grief and the ache of something she couldn't name. But eventually, it rose in her chest like a song she couldn't hold in anymore. "He was a broken boy," she said one night, voice barely above a whisper. Caleb was sitting beside her in bed, reading. He closed the book. He was a boy who never learned how to be a man. And I made that worse. I let my silence teach him that hurting people wouldn't cost him anything. That love meant protecting him no matter what. Caleb didn't try to tell her it wasn't her fault. He knew that wasn't what she needed. He just reached for her hand and held it. "You didn't create him," he said. "You just loved him the only way you knew how." Mary Ellen nodded, but the tears still came. "I wanted him to be good," she whispered. "You did everything you could," Caleb said. "You did more than most would have." The truth sat between them, heavy and quiet, but it didn't crush them. In town, folks started asking questions again. Someone heard about the night Samuel returned. Rumors spread like they always did, quick and careless. Some said Mary Ellen ran him off with a shotgun. Others claimed Caleb threatened to hang him. One person even swore Samuel had been buried under the north field. Mary Ellen didn't correct any of them. She didn't know the town and explanation. But she did make one stop at Pastor Abel's house. He answered the door with his usual calm smile. "Mary Ellen, I've come to confess," she said simply. He stepped aside without a word and let her in. For an hour, she talked. Not to be forgiven, she didn't ask for that, but because she needed someone to hear it all. Every decision, every lie, every time she should have said no, but said nothing instead. Pastor Abel didn't interrupt. When she finished, he sat with his hands folded and nodded once. "I can't speak for God," he said, "but I can tell you this. Hiding the truth costs you more than telling it ever would have. You paid every day for what you covered." Mary Ellen breathed deep. "So what do I do now?" He looked her in the eyes. "Live better." That's what she tried to do. She mended fences, both the wooden kind and the emotional kind. She invited Ruth back for tea after years of distance. She apologized to the neighbor boy she'd slapped when he tried to speak up about Samuel all those years ago. She planted a new tree near the creek, right where the sun caught the water, and said a prayer under her breath. Not for Samuel, but for herself. One morning, while checking the chicken coop, she found something tucked under the loose floorboard, an old toy. Wooden, worn smooth. Samuel had carved it when he was 8, a tiny horse with lopsided legs. She sat in the dirt and held it in her hand for a long time. He hadn't always been cruel. There were days, real, sweet days, when he'd run through the fields barefoot, laughing so loud it echoed across the hills. There were nights he'd curl up beside her during thunderstorms, hiding his face in her shoulder. Grief is strange like that. It pulls you forward, then slams you back with a memory so tender you almost forget the ending. But Mary Ellen didn't forget anymore. She just let the memories pass through her like wind through grass. No need to cling. No need to run. Late that summer, a letter came. No return address. Just her name, carefully written. Inside was a single page. "I'm alive. I don't know for how long. I don't want to be found. But I remember what you said. I'm not asking you to forgive me. Just know that I heard you." No signature. But she knew. She folded the letter and placed it between the pages of her Bible. Not out of faith, but because it was the only book in the house she'd never throw away. That night, she sat beside Caleb on the porch, the sky painted in pink and gold. He handed her a cup of coffee, still warm. "Bad news?" he asked. "No," she said softly. "Just a ghost passing through." They didn't speak again for a while. The land stretched quiet before them. The cattle moved slow in the field. The breeze carried the scent of lilacs from the garden she and Caleb had started together. Mary Ellen thought of all the things she could have done differently, all the choices that had led to so much pain. And still, she was here, still breathing, still trying. That was its own kind of redemption. Not perfect, not clean, but real. Sometimes, the best you can hope for isn't justice or even peace. Sometimes, it's just a quiet morning, a soft breeze, and the chance to live one more day without fear. And maybe that's enough.